was a Tuesday in March, but the air felt like October, cold, damp, and heavy, with a premonition that something had already gone very wrong. The rain in
hasn't
Everman,
let up.
Texas does not just fall.
According to the map,
It drowns the
house
sound
should
of
be
the
right
world,
around this corner.
turning the suburban streets into a labyrinth of gray shadows and slick asphalt. At the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a house sat in total darkness. No lights in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. Just a silence so thick you could almost feel it pressing against your chest. When the first patrol car pulled up, the flashing red and blue lights sliced through the downpour, reflecting off the puddles like fresh blood. Officer Sanders stepped out, his boots splashing into the mud, the sound echoing against the silence of the neighboring homes. He was not there for a crime, at least, not yet. He was there for a welfare check. A simple, routine check on a 6-year-old boy named Noel Rodriguez Alvarez. A boy who had not been seen in months. A boy who, according to his mother, had moved away to see his father in Mexico. But as Sanders walked up the porch, he felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The house did not feel empty. It felt guarded. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for him to turn the handle.
Please open up.
He knocked. Once. Twice. The sound was hollow, dead. He waited, the rain soaking through his uniform, but there was no response. Just the distant rumble of thunder and the rhythmic dripping of water from a broken gutter. He tried the knob. It was locked, but the door felt thin, fragile, like it was hiding a secret that was ready to burst out. When the backup arrived and the decision was made to breach, the sound of the door frame splintering was like a gunshot in the night. They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the stale, stagnant air. The first thing that hit them was not a sound or a person. It was the smell. It was not the smell of decay, not yet. It was the heavy, cloying scent of incense and black wax, a smell that belonged in a tomb, not a family home. As the beams of light swept across the living room, they did not find toys. They did not find a child's backpack or a stray shoe. The room was stripped bare, except for the corners. In the corners, the shadows seemed to move, dancing in the edges of their vision. And then, the light hit the altar.
Origins of
A
the
wooden
bony
table,
lady are
draped in
shrouded
black
mystery.
cloth, covered in dozens of guttering candles and bowls of dried flowers. And in the center, a figure carved from bone, draped in a tattered robe, holding a scythe. The skeleton saint, Santa Muerte. She was smiling, her empty sockets staring back at the officers as if she knew exactly where Noel was, as if she was the one who had taken him. The house was a shell, a hollowed-out monument to a faith that had turned into a nightmare. They moved through the hallway, their footsteps clicking on the bare floorboards, every sound amplified in the terrifying stillness. They checked the bedrooms, one by one. The master bedroom was a mess of unmade sheets and discarded documents. But it was Noel's room that froze their blood. The door was locked from the outside, a heavy, metal slide bolt that did not belong on a child's door. When they slid it back, the screech of metal on metal made Sanders wince. The room inside was small, cramped, and smelled of old sweat and fear. There was no bed, just a thin, dirty mattress on the floor, no windows. They had been boarded up from the inside with thick plywood. In the beam of the flashlight, they saw the walls. They were covered in scratches, hundreds of them, low to the ground, where a small pair of hands would have been. Noel had not been living in this room. He had been kept in it, and now he was gone. The silence in the room was suffocating. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the house, replaced by the crushing weight of everything that had happened within these four walls. Sanders looked down at the floor, near the edge of the mattress. There, in the thin layer of dust, was a single tiny footprint. It was dried mud, a memory of a child who had once stood here, terrified and alone. But as he followed the direction of the footprint, it did not lead to the door. It led toward the closet, a closet that was standing slightly ajar, just enough to see a sliver of darkness inside. Sanders felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, primal rhythm that told him to run, to get out, to call for help. But he could not move. He stood there, the light of his flashlight trembling in his hand, staring at that dark slit of the closet door. Was Noel in there? Was he hiding, waiting for a savior who had arrived too late? Or was there something else in the dark? Something that did not breathe. Something that did not have a heartbeat. The rain outside seemed to intensify, a deafening roar that muffled the sounds of the other officers moving through the house. In that moment, Sanders was alone with the footprint and the closet. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold wood of the door. He pushed it open, slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The closet was empty, except for a single black candle sitting on the floor, its wick still warm, a thin trail of smoke rising into the air like a ghost. Noel was gone, but the presence of the saint was everywhere. It was in the air they breathed,
Don't look back.
in the shadows that clung to the ceiling, in the very foundation of the house. This was not just a missing persons case. It was a descent into a madness that defied explanation. A mother's love twisted into a weapon of sacrifice. A child's life traded for the favor of a skeleton in a robe. As they moved back into the living room, the radio crackled to life, the voice of the dispatcher sounding thin and mechanical. No sign of the mother, no sign of the stepfather. The cars were gone. The neighbors said they had seen them packing bags in the middle of the night, their movements frantic and hushed under the cover of the rain. They had fled, and they had not taken Noel with them. Or had they? Sanders looked back at the altar, at the grinning face of the skeleton saint. He realized then that the house was not just empty because the people had left. It was empty because everything that made it a home had been systematically destroyed, replaced by a cold, unyielding devotion to the end of all things. The welfare check was over, but the nightmare was only beginning. Every room they searched revealed another layer of the delusion.
But
the kitchen was filled with rotting food,
that tells a
but
different
the
story
cupboards were
entirely.
bare of anything a child would eat. There were no pictures on the walls, no memories of birthdays or school days.
They
It was
called
as
it
if
the Quiet
Noel
House,
Rodriguez
a place
Alvarez
where the
had
shadows
never
seemed
existed,
to linger long
as if
after
he
the
was a
sun.
ghost they were trying to catch in the dark. But the
I don't
scratches
see
on the
what I
walls
see in
told
the
a different
shadow.
story. The footprint in the dust proved he was real. He had been here. He had suffered here. And now, the hunt for the truth would lead them into a darkness that stretched far beyond the borders of Texas, into the heart of a cult, and across the ocean to a place where secrets go to be buried forever. But first, they had to deal with the house. They had to deal with the silence. And they had to figure out what was buried beneath the fresh concrete in the backyard. The rain continued to fall, washing away the tracks of the fugitives, leaving the police alone with the saint and the memory of a boy who had disappeared into the shadows of faith. To understand the silence that Officer Sanders found in that house, you have to go back, months before the splintering of the door, back to when the air in Everman was still clear of the scent of black wax.
Please
The neighbors
accept
remember
my
Cindy as a
sacrifice.
woman who was always on the edge, a mother of many, struggling to keep her head above water. But then, something shifted. It was like a cold front had moved into her soul, settling deep in her bones.
Where is it? I know I
She
saw it.
began
It's
to
getting
talk
closer.
about the
They're all
saint.
around me. Help me,
Not the
please.
ones in the
Someone help
stained
me.
glass windows of the local chapels, but the one who walks in the shadows of the Valley of Death. She spoke of Santa Muerte with a devotion that bordered on a fever dream. To her, the skeleton saint was not a symbol. She was a living, breathing presence that demanded total surrender. And as Cindy's faith grew, the space for her son, Noel, began to shrink. The neighbors would see her in the yard, her eyes glazed, whispering to the air as if she were receiving instructions from someone invisible. They noticed the change in the house first. The bright curtains were replaced by heavy, dark blankets. The sound of children playing was replaced by a low, rhythmic chanting that drifted through the walls at 3 in the morning. But the most chilling change was Noel himself. He had always been a fragile child, born with challenges that made him small, vulnerable, and dependent. But in Cindy's eyes, his weakness was not a medical condition. It was a curse. She began to tell people, anyone who would listen, that Noel was possessed. She said he was a demon, an evil spirit that had taken up residence in the body of a boy to torment her. Can you imagine that? A mother looking at her own child, a 6-year-old who could barely stand on his own, and seeing a monster. The rituals started in the dead of night. Through the thin walls of the suburban homes, the neighbors heard the scratching, a sound like claws on wood, and the low, guttural murmurs of prayers that felt more like threats. They heard Noel cry, a thin, wavering sound that would suddenly be cut off, followed by a silence that was even more terrifying than the scream. One neighbor, an elderly man who lived 3 houses down, remembers seeing Noel through the chain-link fence in the backyard. It was a gray afternoon, and the boy was standing perfectly still. He was wearing a shirt that was 3 sizes too big, his collarbones jutting out like jagged rocks. His eyes were not the eyes of a child. They were hollow, empty, as if the light had been extinguished long ago.
Locals called it
He didn't
the
wave.
tomb.
He didn't cry
Boarded
for
up
help.
since the incident
He
in
just stood
88,
there,
it holds a
staring at the
secret the town
ground,
would-
while the shadow of his mother
She's
loomed in the
sleeping.
doorway behind
I
him.
made sure.
She called him back inside, her voice a sharp, jagged edge in the quiet air. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. After that, the windows were boarded up. Plywood was nailed over the glass, sealing the house like a tomb. Cindy told the authorities he was in Mexico. She told the school he was sick. She told herself he was gone because the saint had reclaimed what was hers. But the truth was still in the house. It was in the slide bolt she installed on his bedroom door. It was in the mattress that stayed on the floor, soaked in the sweat of a child who was being starved of light and love. As the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere in the cul-de-sac grew heavy. People avoided walking past the house. They said the air felt colder there, that the birds wouldn't land on the roof. And then came the concrete. A truck arrived in the middle of a torrential downpour. 2 men, shadows in the rain, began to pour a fresh slab in the backyard. Why would anyone pour concrete in a storm? Why would they work so frantically, smoothing the gray sludge over the earth while the lightning lit up the sky like a strobe light? The neighbors watched from behind their own curtains, their hearts sinking with a dread they couldn't name. They knew, deep down, in that primal part of the human brain that recognizes danger, they knew the earth was being sealed. The cement was not for a patio. It was a lid, a heavy, permanent lid on a secret that was never supposed to see the light of day. Inside the house, Cindy was already packing. She wasn't moving toward a new beginning. She was running from a ghost. She threw documents into the trash, burned photos in the kitchen sink, and knelt one last time before the altar of the skeleton saint. She asked for protection. She asked for the rain to wash away the scent of what she had done. And then, as the concrete began to harden in the yard, she gathered the rest of the family and slipped into the night. They drove through the storm, their headlights cutting through the dark, headed for an airport, headed for a world away, leaving Noel behind in the silence of the boarded-up rooms. They left the black candles, they left the muddy footprints, and they left the saint to guard the house. For months, the house sat there, a silent witness to the horror. The grass grew long and yellow, the mail piled up, but no one came, not until the whispers became too loud to ignore. Not until the police finally stood on that porch and realized that the woman who had fled was not a mother. She was a disciple of a darkness that had consumed her entirely. Every step Sanders took through that house in the present was a step through the echoes of those final, desperate months. He could almost hear the scratching on the walls. He could almost feel the cold breath of the saint on his neck. The delusion had been so complete, so total, that it had wiped away every trace of the boy. But as the investigation deepened, they realized that the concrete in the backyard was just the beginning. The trail of Noel Rodriguez Alvarez led into a labyrinth of hidden bank accounts, burner phones, and a flight path that spanned across continents. But no matter how far Cindy ran, she couldn't outrun the house. She couldn't outrun the smell of the wax or the memory of the locked door. And as the police began to break ground on that fresh slab of concrete, the whole world held its breath, waiting to see if the saint would finally give up her secrets, or if Noel would remain a shadow forever, buried under the weight of a faith that had forgotten the meaning of mercy. The backyard was no longer a yard. It was a crime scene, a muddy, chaotic excavation site illuminated by high-powered floodlights that made the falling rain look like silver needles piercing the dark earth. The sound of the wind had been replaced by the rhythmic, mechanical grunt of a backhoe, its steel teeth biting into the fresh concrete slab that Cindy had poured in such a hurry. Every time the shovel hit the stone, a jarred, hollow sound echoed through the neighborhood, a sound that felt like it was breaking open a ribcage. The investigators stood around the perimeter, their yellow rain slickers glowing in the artificial light, their faces grim and set. They were looking for Noel, but they were also looking for the truth, buried deep beneath the weight of his mother's lies. The concrete was thick, reinforced with a desperation that only a person with everything to hide could muster. As the hours ticked past midnight, the tension became a physical thing, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. And then, the machine stopped. A worker climbed into the pit, his hands trembling as he brushed away the loose dirt with a small brush. He had found something. It wasn't a body, not yet. It was a small blue shoe, a sneaker, caked in dried mud, the laces still tied as if it were waiting for a foot to slip back inside. A few feet away, a torn piece of a tattered shirt emerged from the clay, the fabric stained with the same dark earth that had kept it hidden. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. They realized then that Noel had been erased, piece by piece, item by item, until there was nothing left but these fragments of a life interrupted. While the search in the dirt continued, the digital trail was finally coming into focus. The flight manifests confirmed the worst fears of the investigators. Cindy, her husband, and the other children had boarded a plane to India just days before the police had arrived at the house. They hadn't used their real names at first. They had moved through the shadows of the airport like ghosts, vanishing into the international terminal while the concrete in their backyard was still wet. They had left behind the house, the furniture, and the grinning statue of the skeleton saint. But they had also left behind a child who deserved a name, a child who deserved to be found. The investigators looked at the empty mattress in the boarded-up room, then at the hole in the backyard, and they realized the true horror of the delusion. To Cindy, Noel was not a son. He was a debt to be paid. He was a sacrifice offered to a darkness she had invited into her home. The case of Noel Rodriguez Alvarez remains one of the most haunting mysteries in the history of Texas. The family is still out there, somewhere in the sprawling landscape of another continent, living a life that was paid for with the silence of a 6-year-old boy, and the house in Everman. It still stands, though the windows are now dark and the doors are sealed with yellow tape. People say that if you stand on the sidewalk at 3 in the morning, when the rain is falling and the wind is just right, you can still hear the scratching. A soft, rhythmic sound of small fingers on wood, desperate to get out. Or maybe it is the saint, still waiting in the corner, her bony hand reaching out for the next soul that wanders too close to the edge of faith. We are left with the questions that have no answers. How does a mother's heart turn to stone? How does a community miss the cries of a child living in their midst? And where is Noel? Is he truly beneath the earth? Or has he become a part of the shadows that haunt that quiet cul-de-sac forever? The skeleton saint still smiles, her secrets locked behind a jaw of bone, leaving us to wonder what else is buried in the places we refuse to look. If you have ever felt a chill in a room that should be warm, or seen a shadow move where there was no light, perhaps you are catching a glimpse of the world Noel was forced to inhabit. A world where the things we fear are not under the bed, but standing right behind us, whispering our names in the dark. If this story has left a weight on your chest, you are not alone. These are the tragedies that remind us how fragile the light truly is. If you want to keep exploring the darkest corners of true crime and the mysteries that the world tried to bury, make sure to subscribe to Lost Horror. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe justice will ever find its way back to that Texas backyard? Stay vigilant, because some secrets are meant to stay buried. But the truth always finds a way to scream. This is Lost Horror, and the night is just beginning.